Sullivan's lovemaking disturbed the slumber of his sweetheart's parents. Their advice on the subject raised John's ire, and he immediately declared himself. Loses his sweetheart and is fined $15. Ain't heart never won fair lady, and it is not considered good manners, even in Waterbury, for a man to acquire a load of Dutch courage when he calls on his best girl to propound a question which may have an important bearing on their future. For several years, John Sullivan has been enamored of pretty Miss Sweeney, daughter of Michael Sweeney of Baldwin Street. John has frequently urged Mary to marry him, but for reasons best known to herself, she has refused to do so. That she was sensible was demonstrated Tuesday night, when Sullivan went to the house, and created such a disturbance that it was found necessary to have him arrested. John has been saving up his money of late, and Tuesday he purchased a new suit of clothes, and after hoisting aboard a good-sized load of intoxicants, he visited the Sweeney residence for the avowed purpose of pressing his suit for the hand of the fair daughter. John was very loquacious, and urged the girl to marry him in language more forcible than polite. The couple held their little séance on the veranda of the Sweeney residence, and John's protestations of love could be heard all over the neighborhood. He disturbed the rest of Mr. and Mrs. Sweeney, who frequently interrupted his discourse with words of advice intended to hasten his departure in order that the neighborhood might secure much-needed rest to fit them for the hard work of the next day. Mrs. Sweeney's advice was intended for her daughter, but it had a demoralizing effect on John, who did not relish outside interference, just at the moment when he imagined his darling was on the verge of saying yes. On one occasion it is reported Mrs. Sweeney said, "Sure, Mary, if you're going to marry Johnny, why don't you say so, and have done with it? But if you don't want to, don't be afraid to tell him so and send him off about his business at once." This advice raised John's ire to a boiling pitch, as he considered his sweetheart was capable of deciding on what she would do without any interference from her mother. But the climax came when Mr. Sweeney went to the door and delivered the following oration. "Johnny, you're a good boy and I always liked you, but I've got a hard day's work to do tomorrow, and I wish you would go home so that I could go to sleep." This was too much for Sullivan, and he immediately declared himself. All thoughts of love were banished from his mind, and his sole ambition appeared to be to wipe up the floor with his sweetheart's father, who is a cripple, and no match for brawny John Sullivan. He was not allowed to enter the house, however, and complaint was made to Officer Burton, who soon landed the obstreperous suitor behind the bars. When the case was called in the city court Wednesday morning, Sullivan, who had been released on bail shortly after his arrest, was still far from being sober. With a drunken man's usual nerve, however, he had the temerity to state that he had only taken 2 drinks, which statement was not credited by the court. He told a rambling story in regard to his being Mary Sweeney's steady company, and took occasion to remark that if she didn't marry him, she wouldn't marry anybody. Sullivan, in the course of his story, said he was no fool, but Judge Cowell took exception to this on the ground that nobody but a fool would have got in his condition, knowing that a charge of drunkenness and breach of the peace was pending against him. He was fined $10 and costs for drunkenness, and $5 for breach of the peace. Sullivan also cautioned the reporters present not to mention his name, or there would be trouble. He did this so decidedly that he attracted the attention of Chief Egan, who promptly and effectually squelched him, by taking him by the nape of the neck and making him sit down, at the same time telling him to keep his mouth shut. It is currently reported that Mary has at last decided to have nothing more to do with her overzealous lover, and if he visits the Sweeney household again, he will undoubtedly meet with a very cool reception. The Sunday Herald, Bridgeport, Connecticut, May 31, 1896.